Hello, hello. Welcome to the Embodied Healing Holistic Wellness Conversation Series, sponsored by Racial Healing and Wellness Coaching for Women. I am Rosella Ide White, one of the co-founders of this program, and I'm joined by my co-founder, Nicole Newman. The purpose of this conversation series for Black History Month is to introduce ourselves, Racial Healing and Wellness Coaching for Women as a program, and share some key practices that ground our work. This week, we are exploring the key practice of spirituality. We define spirituality as a way of being that first and foremost recognizes a power that's greater than ourselves, who is seeking to be in relationship with each of us. This power invites us to create space, engage practices, participate in experiences, and embody relationships that strengthen our intuition and open us to receive insight and wisdom from the divine. Spirituality is a practice that includes rituals and traditions rooted in culture and experience. And for our purposes, we define spirituality as something that is separate and apart from religion. So for each conversation series, as we begin, we will begin in the way that we begin our coaching and our programs with grounding.
Beautiful. So our grounding for tonight comes from Cole Arthur Riley, author of This Here Flesh and creator of Black Liturgies. If you're not following that account, you should absolutely follow it. Black Liturgies writes, "It's okay to distance yourself from spiritual spaces that are more concerned with what doctrine you believe than protecting you. Find a place to exhale. If the concept of God has any validity or use, it can only be to make us larger, freer, and more loving." James Baldwin. Inhale. I don't know what I believe. Exhale, but I know it will sound like dignity. Inhale. I am done holding this breath. Exhale. I deserve to exhale. Inhale. I can search for true belonging. Exhale. God, keep me near as I wander. So there are 4 practices that are integral to our work of racial healing and wellness. Those practices are, they're part of our program, and those practices are spirituality, values, relationships, and embodiment. One of the ways that we connect our practices is what we call possibilities. So practices help us to live into what's possible in our own lives, what's possible in our communities, and what's possible when we really commit to the journey of racial healing and wellness. So one of the possibilities for our program that we really work with participants to flesh out is to connect to their ancestral history and the realities that those histories created. So for all of our key demographics, whether that's white women, Black women, women of color, teen girls, right? We're really helping people to connect back to their ancestry and to see how does that inform the work that they are doing, their commitment to justice, and their spiritual lives, right? And so for me, that has been a personal journey of really looking back to look forward and really realizing that I don't stand alone ever in a room. My ancestors are always with me. They're always guiding me. They're always calling me. And some of the things that they've experienced, right, continue to show up. For all of our demographics, we ask people to think about what has your ancestry created? And then how are you doing the work now to deconstruct some of the legacies of that ancestry? And how are you doing the work now to heal some of those legacies? And then what will the legacies be for future generations?
Well, it's interesting, Nicole, because you have been on a journey on uncovering some things about your ancestry. And I'm curious, would you be willing to share some of what you've learned and how that has been a spiritual journey for you?
Oh, absolutely. So, I'm a Black American, right? I always tell people my family has deep roots in the South and in Washington, D.C. Like those are 2 kind of branches of my tree. And I think one of the things when you grow up as a Black American who has a legacy of slavery, sharecropping, all of that, all of the atrocities of this country. One of the things that is passed down because our folks weren't considered people and their histories weren't documented in the same way um, is that you go on what you hear. So my entire life I've heard that we have like we have Indian in our family is how the elders said it.
And so
And I
many of
was
us have heard that.
right. So many of us have heard that. And so I'll always be like, and for me, coming into political consciousness, I would be like, why can't we just be Black? Like, it's okay if we're just Black. Like, it's okay. We don't have to try to spice it up, you know? And recently, about a year and a half ago, an aunt of mine really started digging into our family tree and wanted to do some work around understanding who we were. And so what she found is that actually that those kind of stories that have been passed down orally, right, for a long time were actually true. That our family was indigenous and did have a legacy of indigenous folks in our family, and that we were part of the Piscataway Conoy tribe that were native to Charles County and Maryland and Washington, D.C. And before she passed, one of the big projects that she did was trying to get our entire family to really claim identity and ownership and get tribal membership, because she felt like it was an important part of us reconciling that being from this area, being like fourth, fifth generation Washingtonians, right, that we actually had a stake to this land, that this was not just something that was like a nice to do for us to be in this area, but that this was actually part of our ancestral home. And I think it's a complex thing, right, to be Black and indigenous and to be figuring out what that means as someone who presents very Black and has lived their entire life as a Black woman. And what it has meant for me is having to be able to be okay with the not knowing, right?
Yeah.
With the
Yeah.
incompleteness, with the people whose names I will never know, right? With the things that feel innate to me that I can't explain, right? That right. I always tell people when I was little, we used to go down to Haynes Point, which is on the Potomac River. And I just felt always at home there.
Yeah.
Right? And I never knew why. I just always felt like so comfortable on the water. Right. And it's like, oh, my people are from here. Right. The people who were escaping slavery and the people who were indigenous to this land are all from here. No wonder I feel home here. And that reclamation has been part of how I've attempted to try to heal some of the past for myself, even if it's in a very small way, right? Of like,
Yeah.
how do I reconcile that these communities that are often pitted against each other actually love together and live together? And there was a lot that happened that we'll never know, but I can rest in part of my own history, part of my own spiritual journey is being in that in between place.
No, that makes a ton of space. And makes a ton of sense. As you were talking about that, it does relate directly back to what we believe that spirituality is, right? The power that invites us to create space, engage practices, participate in experiences, and embody relationships, right? So this connecting to your ancestral history is, I think, it's work that's in all of these areas as you are opened up to receive deeper insight and wisdom and strengthen your intuition, right? So that like learning this confirmed and affirmed some things that you knew, but you didn't know how you knew it. And it's like, oh, because it flows through my blood, my veins. Like this is work that flows through me. So that makes a ton of sense. You know, the other possibility that is a part of this program that connects to spirituality as practice is that we believe being spiritually grounded and in flow with energetic forces, past, present, and future that lead us towards liberation becomes what's possible when we engage this work. I love the grounding that we did today from Cole and from Black liturgies, because there's something to be said about the spaces and places that we have been in, for those of us
Mm,
who have been a part of religions that were not leading us towards liberation, right? Spaces and places that felt oppressive, where we had to suppress aspects of who we are or who we felt called to be, and where I feel like honestly flow was stunted
mm,
because of what we were doing as humans in those spaces. So when I think about spiritually or spirituality and this work and being spiritually grounded in this work, it's that we are in connection and an alignment with a force that's greater than ourselves. And when we talk about spirituality, we're not just talking about things that are in a Christocentric light, right? I think Nicole and I have experiences in a variety of religious practices and ways of experiencing who God is, but we also have been on a journey of expanding our spiritual practices that really do get us in touch with energy. And when we talk about energy, yes, we're talking about God. Yes, we're talking about divine. Yes, we're talking about spirit. And we're even talking about Jesus sometimes, right? Like all of that makes up
depends on the
who we
context.
are. It depends on the context. And we know that spirituality from spirit, right, or spirit in and of itself is an energetic force that flows, that moves, that touches us and impacts us in various ways. And the key practice of this program is to invite people to lean in, to expand, and to get really curious about their own spiritual practices, the beliefs that their spirituality embedded within them, the way that those beliefs have either been life-giving or
Mm,
life-taking, and asking the age-old organizing question that Nicole constantly brings to the forefront of who does this way of thinking benefit, right?
mm,
How does this way of being and believing um, aid in this work of embodied healing and holistic wellness, or how does it stunt it? So this work can't be done separate and apart from
no,
spirituality. And so
no.
that's why it's a guiding practice.
Well, and I think the other thing that Rosella you're hitting on is the connection between the two. It's not, it's we go back to go forward, but
Mhm.
we also go deep to go wide, right? And
Yes.
so part of the work of creating sustainable social change is to have a spiritual basis, right? Yes, we can do all the political work. Yes, we can do all the organizing work. Yes, we can tell people to be kind to each other. Yes, we can call for reparations. All of those things can be true. And if there is not, right, a real sense of spiritual groundedness, right, those things can
Mhm.
feel like tactics that don't actually create different conditions. And what we're talking about is creating more possibility, creating more change, creating more spaciousness for people to really lean into their belovedness and the belovedness of other people.
And I mean, continuing with this, right? We're talking about sustainability. I think we had a conversation years ago where we were talking about what are the things that um, keep people engaged in the fight, right? Whatever
Mhm.
the fight is. And this recognition that anger has a place. Some would even
Oh, for sure.
say shame has a place, guilt has a place. And we know that none of those are sustainable, right?
Mhm.
Like anger, it can burn fast and hot, but it's going to burn quickly, right? Shame is going to take you and me down with it, right?
Yeah.
Guilt does not serve anyone. Even if we recognize it and say, okay, I feel guilty, but at the end of the day, it doesn't transform into something that I think is wide serving or wide reaching. But when we think about spirituality, when we think about something that, again, deeper, wider, more expansive,
Mhm.
grounds us, it becomes the thing that centers us and sustains us
Mhm.
in this work, because this work is internal, it's deeply internal,
Of
and
course.
it has external implications, right? The idea is that this is internal work that has external implications, and those external implications lead us back internally to continue to dig deeper. And as we go deeper, I think more is revealed because we're now
Mhm.
ready to receive it.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Well, and it's also the part of like every time I've got right, my journey around spirituality and spiritual practices, getting in contact and getting in alignment with my ancestors, right? And learning from them. every time I'm ready for more, they give me more.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
time I show up, right, willing to listen, they show up ready to speak. And I think this idea though, right, of like, oh, that's, that's demonic, or that's this or that, all of that stunts us from actually doing the deeper work. I had someone tell me one time, they're like, your ancestors are so strong around you. I don't know that you know how strong they are, right?
Listen.
Like I can feel their presence, right? And to have somebody else say that to me before I was ready to receive that they're, and from a spiritual standpoint, right? Even from a biblical standpoint, they talk about a mighty cloud of witnesses,
Yeah.
right? So we are always going back to go forward. And I think it is important that we recognize um, that it's really hard to create a different future if we're not willing to listen to the past. And particularly in this country, we spend so much time rushing towards a future without ever learning from the lessons from the past. And I think that that's some of the work of getting in contact and getting in touch with our ancestral legacies, is so that we can learn from the past, right? It
Mhm.
is so that we can, maybe not hear, but maybe feel, or maybe embody something different, or practice something different, or not make the same mistakes, right? Or maybe it's just so that we have that awareness that we're not just doing this for now, we're doing this for the future, right? Like it's
Yeah.
it's all of that, and it connects really beautifully to, I think, what we invite people into, which is spiritual depth and spiritual practices.
Yeah. It's not lost on me, and we've had this conversation before, that the both of us have been in some respects on parallel journeys, right?
Mhm.
And so my brother and I did our ancestry testing a few years back, which is, I mean, it's hysterical only because if you don't laugh, you get really mad that like my people were taken from the lands that they were indigenous to, only to now have to
Mhm.
turn around and pay to find out the lands that we were
Right.
indigenous to.
Like,
And
okay,
right,
capitalism is a great
multiple
thing.
things are true, right? And so on my dad's side, we are what I would name as traditional Black American people who were um, enslaved and shipped across the Atlantic
Mhm.
to the Carolinas and Georgia. And then after they received their freedom, migrated up to New York. And on that side, right, I always go back to the women in my life. My father's mother was from a very religious, and I would say
Mhm.
spiritual, but religious
Mhm.
background, right? First out of the Pentecostal holiness tradition, and then eventually into the Baptist tradition. But I wasn't raised with that side of my family, right? I was raised
Mm.
primarily with my mom's side, and my mom's side is all Afro-Caribbean,
Mm.
namely from her mother, Jamaican and St. Crucian, and then they ended up in Puerto Rico. And on her dad, my paternal grandfather, that side is all Puerto Rican.
Mm.
And as I've been doing my ancestry, one of the things that came up was indigenous Taino Indian is a part of my ancestry. So this notion that we are both Black women and we have indigenous blood that runs through our veins, for me, feels very right, given the
Mm.
work that we do in the world and how we
Of
show
course.
up. And also, it feels like I don't want to say even more sacred responsibility, but it feels like it's more, knowing that
Mhm.
both of those things run through our veins,
Mhm.
right? That both the story of Black Americans and also the story of, for me, immigrants and those from the Caribbean, and having these indigenous roots, I think that's a profoundly spiritual concoction, if you will. And so as we operate in this cauldron of all that we are and all that God created us to be, it's no wonder that the first practice that grounds this work is spirituality. Right? So as we have these conversations each week, right, our goal is to share some information, to invite you to reflect, and we'd love to hear from you, right? Share your responses, right, in the caption below, or send us a note. You can always contact us at hello@racialhealwell.com, which will also include below. And join us next Wednesday for our second conversation as we talk about the practice of values. Please also sign up to receive our free resource that's coming out February 15th, Bridging the Gap from Black History Month to Women's History Month. And this resource will invite you to reflect on these practices that help you then embody the possibilities of racial healing and wellness. Lastly, make sure that you follow us on social media. You can find us at Racial Heal Well across platforms. Right now, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We look forward to continuing to engage with you in these conversations, and we hope that you share them and spend time this Black History Month reflecting on your spirituality, your values, your relationships, and ultimately your embodiment, the way of being that you practice in the world. So thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.